So there is the framework for my lovely bed. Well, hello all. I am stealth camping here tonight on my bed. Just two poles. I have slept on a bed like this before. I just want to show you how it's completed. You just take a tarp, and friction holds the bed together. So when you sit on it, the friction of the tarp holds it all together. You don't even have to tie it. There we are. And then in theory, when we sit on or lie on this, the friction holds our weight. And it's doing so. So there is our bed. So we've got a little stove here. So today I've got some lovely white sweet late harvest wine. The meal's going to be quite smelly with onions and steak and a bit of garlic. But it's all pretty delightful. Yeah. My son had this piece of meat lying around. He said, "Do you want it for your stealth camp?" So I said, "Great." So we're very blessed tonight. I'm very lucky to have such a wonderful son. He's 42 and he still stays with me. He likes us enough to want to stay still in the same house. I think that's such a blessing. So he's like a perfect son. I wouldn't say I'm a perfect father, but we do our best. You know, on the subject of fathers and sons, you know, it's interesting how people, I think, broadly fall into two categories. They either copy a parent or they look at how the parent was and they do the opposite. So, for example, my dad wouldn't allow me to ride a motorbike, but now I always ride a motorbike for the last 20 years. Or he used to love preparation because us kids were the ones who did all the preparation of, say, painting a house and lots of painting. And in my old age, I refuse to do any painting, and if I have to, I just paint over the cobwebs, and it works just as well as if you do hours and days and weeks like we used to do as kids of preparation. Or, like my dad used to love his grass. I don't have a blade. Well, I have a little grass in my garden, but that's only because I can't get rid of it. So I don't want to spend my life mowing grass. I'd rather have ground cover. And lots of things like that. So I'm kind of like I try to do the exact opposite of what my dad was. And I think, as I say, that people fall into two types of categories. They either copy their parents or they look at their parents and they do the opposite. Like you may find, say, a parent was an alcoholic. One child will also become an alcoholic and the other kid will not touch alcohol at all because he's seen what it did to his parents. So that's what I mean by kids can tend to copy or do the exact opposite of what their parents do. Look how nice this is doing. But I guess I could say my dad took us camping all the time, so maybe I developed my love of camping from him. We'll put some condiments on the steak. And there's a common kind of thing to blame one's parents. You know, I also fell into that trap for a while of blaming. You blame the parent for, let's say, what they didn't do or did do to you, and you kind of want to say blame them for your life and say, I have emotional insecurity because my daddy made me emotionally insecure. And that's how I felt for a long time. I mean, my dad never affirmed anybody except himself. He really was the epitome of the song, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." He thought he was perfect in every way, and he saw us as very imperfect and didn't hesitate to tell us. And if we did something stupid, he'd say, "Repeat after me, I am stupid." And then if I did something stupid, or he'd say, "Brightly gleams our Stephen," kind of real sarcastically saying, "Hey, you're not the brightest light bulb in the pack or whatever." And I could say, well, I grew up feeling very insecure because my daddy didn't affirm me. And for a while I did feel that. And all my siblings feel that same way, that they felt they lacked affirmation from my dad. I got tons of affirmation from my mom. My mom really loved me. I could do no wrong. So I must be very grateful for the affirmation I got. But I really do think, if I may say so, that we shouldn't really expect that our parents are going to be perfect. I mean, as a parent, you'll know that you're not perfect. Yet we kind of expect that our parents must be had to have been perfect. Another thing that really injured my self-esteem was how my dad used to give us hidings like every week, especially because my brother and I fought all the time because we were forced to stay in the same room. He was 2 years older than me, and he loved to tease and get a rise out of me. And then when I'd get tired enough of him and say, lash out, then we'd end up in a fight, and then we'd both get a hiding, and he got over it in seconds, I got over it in hours. So it was a net win for him. He gave me a bit of a beating, and then my dad finished the beating. So it was like a tag team of beating. And that didn't do things for my self-esteem, but this is the way I view it now. I know that there are people who blame their parents, but I feel if your parents have got you to age 18, where you kind of you're independent, you've got a skill, you've passed school, you've maybe been to college, you're on your own. Maybe you screwed up and you've got to spend the rest of your life in self-therapy or with a therapist to undo the harm that your parents did to you. The thing is that they have provided the launch pad, and I have spent the rest of my life in self-therapy, I could say, kind of getting over the issues that I had right from home. Now, I don't know if my dad gave me those issues, or whether if I'd been in a different home with a different father, whether I'd have had the same issues. I really do think he probably did contribute a lot to them. Because when we were kids, up to say age 3, 4, 5 or something, he would come home from work and he didn't want the kids around. He just wanted us in bed and kids were supposed to be out of sight and to be seen and not heard. So as a result, I grew up very shy. Now my brother was the exact opposite. So I had no experience, we just had no experience with talking to adults. And when adults were around, my brother took it as an opportunity to shine. Wow. Now our parents roll us out and want us to talk to the other guests there and be the life and soul of the party. And yet, when in the normal circumstances, they're not interested in our opinion or us talking to, adults who must be seen and just not heard. Our opinion was never wanted at the dinner table. So, but Now my attitude is, if they've got you to age 18, you've got a skill set, or you've passed college, maybe you're 21. By the time I was 21, I was married. I already had a degree. I had a teaching diploma, and I moved away from home and moved 1,000 miles away from my parents and started an independent life with my wife. So I could say I was launched, and all the issues and baggage that I'd collected from home, I considered it was now my responsibility to get rid of this baggage. I think the steam is going to get in the way of the camera, so let me just put this camera here, if that's any better. Yeah, but for a long time I held a sort of resentment at being beaten so often, and how when I asked my dad, he also had an older brother, and his older brother also teased him, and he also piled into his older brother, and his dad gave him a hiding. I said, how did you like that? He said, I hated it. And yet he copied the exact same stupidity of when the two kids fight. The father gave both kids a hiding. His father gave both him and his brother a hiding. And all he wanted to do was to be left alone and not to have his older brother pick on him. I mean, it was the exact same scenarios with me. So I thought, wow, you hated it, yet you did exactly the same thing to me. I mean, how stupid is that? So he obviously he followed the exact same wrong path, the path he hated, but he just did it, he carried on and did it to us. So I'd say what he should have learned from is don't do it. And what I learned from that is, because I kept on fighting with my older brother and getting hidings for it, I didn't want my son to have a sibling and to be in constant aggravation with him. And so he's an only child, and I think it's wonderful. He's worth half a dozen children. So maybe I did learn something from that I didn't want to repeat that whole process. But I think a better way of handling it would have been to say to the older kid, if there's a fight, I'm just giving you a hiding, because the older kid has all the power. He's the one who's teasing. He's the one who was strong enough to beat the younger one up. And he could have said to the older one, if there's a fight, if he wants to fight you, then you just come and tell me, and then I'll sort him out. And just make it that the older kid gets the hiding. So that is what I would have tried, at least. I mean, my dad never tried to find out who was at fault. He just gave both of us kids a hiding. So I thought, geez, that's the worst of all alternatives. But it's interesting. I was reading and being very interested in a king called Josiah. He was a king of Judah. And he was about the third last king before Judah went into Babylonian captivity. And he was a really great king. But his father was a terrible king. His father only ruled, whose name was Ammon, he only ruled for 2 years, and then he was assassinated. And then Josiah became king at age 8. And he ruled for 31 years, and he did what the Bible says was right in the eyes of the Lord. So he didn't copy his father. He looked at his father and said, I don't want to be like that. So this was his father, Ammon. Then Ammon had a really bad, terrible father called Manasseh. And he was a real terrible person. But Ammon copied it. So Ammon was like his father. And then Manasseh's father was a person called Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was a really great king. He was a really good king. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. So here we see examples of kings who copy bad kings, who copy their father's bad example. And we see kings who don't copy it and become the opposite of their father. So I was reading the book of 2 Kings 22, and goes up to the end of the chapter how Josiah was this wonderful reformist king in the nation of Judah. And Judah was about to be swallowed by the Babylonians, and God was wrathful with them because Manasseh and Ammon had set up these Asherah poles, and they worshipped Molech. They even sacrificed some of their sons live to these deities, and they worshipped them, and God was incensed with Judah. And the book of the law had been lost, and Josiah found it when he was 20, he was 8 years old. I think he found it when he was 26 years old. And he started destroying all these idols and groves and Asherah poles, and stopped the sacrifice to Molech and Chemosh, stopped human sacrifices of babies. And because he did this, there was a prophetess, Hilda, who prophesied that because his heart was tender and because he'd torn his coat when he discovered the law and seen how bad Judah was in comparison with the law, God said, I'm not going to bring the evil that I prophesied on Judah in your generation. It'll come 2 generations later, or it'll come later. God didn't say when, but he would not see the destruction of Judah. So let's turn this off. I think that's done. So I found this all just so interesting, reading how Josiah absolutely didn't want to copy his father. He absolutely reformed and did the opposite of his father. But here they persuaded the people to destroy all the false religion in Judah, and he reigned for 31 years. But after he died, his children were bad kings. They were evil kings. They didn't want to follow the Lord. And neither did the rest of Judah. Judah was the southernmost kingdom. Israel was the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom had gone into Assyrian captivity not long before. And it was like a warning to Judah. And King Josiah took it seriously, and he wanted to avoid the captivity. He wanted to obey God. Managed to convert the nation. There was a big reform in the 31 years he was alive. And then he picked a fight he shouldn't have got involved with the Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, and he got killed in the battle. He got shot by an arrow. I think God had intended that he die in peace, but because he picked this battle with Pharaoh Necho, who was on his way to support the Assyrians against Babylon, so he picked this fight with Pharaoh, and a random arrow hit him and he died. And then the nation just went back to idolatry. So the evil that God had prophesied through people like Jeremiah came to pass. And 20 years after Josiah died, Judah went into Babylonian captivity for 70 years and then came back under Nehemiah. But Judah wasn't ever again a great nation with great kings after that. So it was the end of that experiment that God had had with the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. It's always so interesting to me. I'm going to have to try and cut this meat. This could get a little bit messy. I think I do have a knife. So I hope we don't attract all kinds of dogs, wildlife that smells this lovely, delicious meat. people tend to walk their dogs past you, and a dog would smell this. That is such a tender, delicious piece of meat. Yum, yum. Just needs a bit of salt. But it's interesting how, that whole experiment, they couldn't produce a completely sustainable system. God, these kings were always, well, it's so nice. These kings were always backsliding and going wrong. So if the father was great, the child would be terrible. Or the king may be terrible and the child then suddenly out pops a good one. So I think God was looking for a system whereby, and the people always just seem to follow the king. So if the king was okay, the people would follow. It wasn't like that it wasn't like if the people were really converted, they would have, if the king went wrong, the people would say, no, hold on. We don't want to worship these false idols. But after Josiah's reform, under a bad king, they just go back to being bad again. And I think that's why God ended that experiment with the kings and with the nation of Israel. So around 600 BC, Babylon invaded Judah. And the nation of Israel ceased to be for 70 years. And then in Nehemiah they rebuilt it. But it wasn't long after that they were under Roman occupation. They never seemed to become an independent nation with a proper king and they could do their own thing ever again. And then in 70 AD, the nation of Judah, some might like to call it Israel, just disappeared. And everyone went into captivity. The Jews were scattered. And that was under the reign of Titus. So the temple was just there long enough for Christ to come to his temple. Can't tell you how delicious the meat is. The temple that served, Herod built the temple. Herod was not really a religious person. He wasn't really even a Jew. But he built a lovely temple that Christ could preach in, fulfill the prophecies of a temple. And then when Christ died in 30 AD, 30 years later, in 40 years later, in 70 AD, Titus got tired of the Jews and just came and invaded Judea, destroyed Jerusalem. And since then, there wasn't a nation of Israel till 48, was it 1948? So, there is this problem of how do you create a sustainable system? And the new covenant kind of solves that problem in that God's laws have to be written on the hearts of the people, so that irrespective of whether they've got a king or not, they do what is right. They follow the Lord of their own volition. And Christianity is very much a matter of, it's not a nation, it's every person basically doing what is right in their own eyes. So every Christian stands on their own feet. And I mean, we can't be victims of our parents' bad parenting. There's nothing that our parents can do to us that the Holy Spirit can't undo. And I largely got over my issues and, hang-ups and gripes that I had over the way my dad did things. But my siblings had more trouble, I think, than me even. And even my mom grew up with was married with a fairly negative self-esteem, which I think she largely got from her husband, my father. Who didn't think highly of anyone unless they were really super good at maths. And none of us liked or were very good at maths. I don't know, my dad had this hang up that if you were good at maths, you were bright, and if you weren't good at maths, you weren't. So I wasn't bad at maths. I just didn't like maths. But like I said, my dad was very into self-affirmation and very not into affirming other people. But I don't hold that against him, because I think every parent does their best. They have their limitations. They're not expected to be perfect, they just do their best. And you've got the rest of your life to shrink yourself and to get rid of the hang-ups that your parents gave you. So that's what I've been doing. I mean, I like time to myself every day, even from a teenager. And I've spent my life getting rid of feelings of guilt or inadequacy, which were largely, I think, put into me, possibly starting with my dad. So he did his best. I mean, the poor soul, he was a lovely man. He had so many good qualities. But he wasn't into affirmation. He wasn't into telling his kids that he loved them or even liked them. I think that was very much the way things were in those days. I'm talking back in the 60s. I don't think parents were into affirmation of children. Oh, you're all winners, you're all wonderful, you're great, nothing wrong with you. Parents were more into finding fault with you. Everything was wrong with you. So they were silent on what was right about you, and they were very critical of what was wrong with you. And then if there was something wrong with you, a good way to get rid of it was to beat you. So that just was the way it was. Well, That truly was a delicious meal. Delicious. So I really think it's worth, I know these people. I'm thinking of Fiona Campbell, Feet of Clay, who walked around the world to, I think, impress her father. She felt that her father didn't think highly of her, and maybe to get attention and to make him approve of her, I think she tried to walk around the world. I read her book, Feet of Clay, and I think there's so many people like that who do things. They walk to the poles, or they climb Everest, or they do something in the hope of getting their parents' affirmation and approval and approbation and love and attention and whatever it is. I mean, I think it's just better. Who cares? Your parents have done the best for you. Love them for the way they are. Don't make your life driven by this desire to get your parents' approval. I think that is just, it's like enslavement to approbation. I think it's a big mistake. So I think it's getting dark here. I've got my hanging bed, which works on just friction. At the moment, it needs a bit of redoing, but I think it's going to work for the night. I've got a sleeping bag. It's getting dark here. That was a delicious steak. Wow. Yeah, so I remember once I said to my dad, you do all these things for my brother and my sister. You do this, you lend them money, you help them, you do this, that, and the other, and you won't even do something small for me. And his reply was, boo-hoo. Those two little words were the most empowering words of my whole life. I was about, what was I about? I was about 50, age 50, 20 years ago. He said, boo-hoo. Those two words in that 1 second just so empowered me when I realized, my dad, he liked us all, but he couldn't care less. He couldn't care that to try and treat all kids equally, or to be, tough luck. That's the way they were in those days. Boo-hoo. And I felt so empowered because I realized it didn't matter if he liked me or not. And I was a middle child. I noticed there were tons of photographs of my older brother. There were none of me. And the only other photographs were of my older brother, myself, and my sister together. There were virtually none of me. He was a very keen photographer. So my older brother was doing all these new things. When I came along, there was nothing new to photograph, so he didn't bother to photograph. I wasn't important enough to photograph. And then when my sister came along, she was doing different things because she was a girl, and there were tons of photographs of her, but none of me. And it all began to click into place. He really didn't care that much. I mean, but I was so lucky that I had the affirmation of my mother, to have had one person who truly loved and affirmed me in my life. I mean, wow. And that boohoo helped me just get so over trying to impress or to live my life according to, the opposite of my dad or like my dad. But as a general rule, I've just lived my life opposite to the way my dad used to do things. So I hope that's of some interest and value to you. Wow, what a lovely supper. It's getting dark. I doubt that I can even see you. You can even see me. But there we go. What a lovely supper, and I hope we can have a good sleep this evening. Well, I'm camping on the edge of a forest, and the crescent moon is just about to set. This bed is surprisingly, really I'm quite surprised at how comfortable it is, with it being such a tiny moon tonight. It's absolutely pitch black. I'm on the edge of a forest, but what's quite nice is I'm on the edge, so there is open sky and some stars, but otherwise it is just incredibly black. But like I say, this bed is surprisingly comfortable for just a tarpaulin that's draped over 2 poles. And I have a feeling if I'd brought my air mattress, it would have been even more comfortable. But still, it's been lovely. I've been watching satellites, and now I think I'm off to sleep. So, what a lovely night and what a lovely supper.